is a part of life, and but some deaths are usually too peculiar, and some funerals are even more peculiar than the deaths. Such was the case about 15 years ago in the village, in my village. There was a death, and people were sad. But before I go on to who died or whose funeral this was, let's go back and talk about the person who died. Now, in the late 60s, somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, a young boy walked into the village. No one knew exactly where he came from, but they could tell from his accent. He said he came from somewhere up north. And he indeed spoke a language or a dialect that was common, those are familiar, those are common amongst the people of northern Kenya, say the Turkana or the Samburu. Now, this is a village in Rift Valley, Kenya, where most people are Kalenjin. So, anyway, he didn't just appear out of nowhere. He obviously just walked into the village. Uh, Nobody knew his name, but he introduced himself. Now, we're going to call him John, okay, just so to hide his identity, even though he's dead. Uh, anyway, John walked in. He was, at that time, he was just about 15, 16 years old. No one knew who his parents were or exactly which part of the country he was from. And spoiler alert, nobody ever knew where he exactly was from. But the people of the village were like, "Hey, this young man, we don't know him, but in African culture, you always tend to visitors and you tend to, uh, yeah, visitors and children, especially if they're children." And so the people of the village took him in. And this guy was particularly good at herding cattle. He could take care of cattle, and so that's part of the jobs that people gave him. You'd actually just leave him with your cattle, and he'd take care of it during the day. And at the end of the day, you could give him money or some food, and he'd accept that. Uh, and this guy stayed with that village in that village for the rest of his life. He never went back to where he came from. Nobody even knew where he came from. That's what I think I already made that clear. Uh, so this guy settles down, and as years go by, he even gets to learn the language. He stops speaking his native language and starts speaking Kalenjin a little bit. He even gets himself a wife. He gets a little village girl there, and they get married and they have kids. And so he becomes assimilated into this community very well. So he becomes part of the community. But fast forward about 30, 40 years later, he falls sick uh, and he dies. Happens very suddenly. He complains of chest pains and over a period of months. And then one night he just couldn't breathe, and people they tried rushing him to the hospital, and yeah, unfortunately there was nothing they could do by then. Nobody even knows exactly what killed him, but we can assume it was some sort of a pulmonary disease. Maybe he had lung cancer. He smoked a lot, so maybe it was lung cancer, maybe COPD. Nobody knows, and we probably never know. And that's one problem about African cultures. They tend to rush you to the hospital right at the end. It's not a really African culture, but it's really a African thing. People don't go to the hospital unless they're dying. Anyway, back to the story. The doctors or the nurses did everything they could, but he passes on somewhere 10, 15 years ago. At that time, he was a much older guy, and he had been taking care of cattle all his life. He never went to school. He never did anything else. Ever since he had arrived at that village from at around 15 years old, all he ever did was take care of cattle for other people. And over time, he built a life. Like I said, he got married. He even got a few cattle of his own. He also had children, but he never left. He never stopped taking care of cattle. So everybody knew him as that cattle guy, as that guy who takes care of cattle, and everyone knew he wasn't from that village. Yeah, just because even though he spoke the local dialect, he kind of looked foreign, but people liked him. I mean, not that people took advantage of him or like despised him because of that. He was just different, and people like that about him. But anyway, passes on, and now he didn't have any family, like I guess. So the villagers, because in African culture you get buried by people, your people, right? If you die right now, if I die right now, it's my people who are gonna bury me. But this guy, like I said, nobody knew where he came from. Nobody who knew any his parents were, or who his brothers were, or even his village. So the villagers were like, this guy has been part of us for a long time. So let's go ahead and give him a proper send off. And so they gather some money, and everybody contribute. In Africa we call it harambe, or in Kenya, harambe is basically uh, like a GoFundMe, but without the phones and the smartphones. It's just a GoFundMe basically, where people gather around and they contribute. 10 shillings here, 20 shillings here, a sack of corn, a sack of beans, some potatoes, and they sell it, and and that raises money, and they were able to pay out, and so the villagers were able to raise a little bit of money, a substantial amount of money, and they buy a casket, and they release his body from the mortuary because that costs a lot of money, and so they bring his body home. And in African culture, I don't know. This is probably different from white people or like Western culture. In African culture, the body stays at the mortuary till the last day before the burial. That last day before the last night before the burial, the body has to sleep in its previous home, right? So, and that's why in African culture, it's really important that you build a home when you're alive, so that when you die, your body is taken to the last day, uh, you know, or the last day before you're buried, the last night before you're buried, you can sleep in your home. And anyway, back to the story. The last night before he gets buried, the body gets brought in, and he had built himself a house. Like I said, he had a family. It wasn't a big house. It was just a mud house, about the size of this room. But it was split into rooms. There was kitchen, not a kitchen. Those, in Africa, it was just two rooms. In one room, it was the kitchen and the dining room and the sitting room, or like the living room. Not separate rooms, just one room that actually has all of it. Then of course the other room was a bedroom, and so yeah, they brought his body on in his casket, and they put it in this first room, which was supposed to be the living room, kitchen, and everything else in between. uh, yeah, so they lay his body. Uh, so someone apparently, so they knew which culture it's from, and so in that culture you had to apparently you had to put the casket in a certain way. Some cultures say, hey, yeah, the casket has to face the sun or the setting sun, so they aligned the casket in some way. I don't remember, or facing the door. There's usually different ways, but yeah, they had aligned the casket in a certain way. But that's not important. The important thing is they put the cross. There's that cross that they put on the casket in African culture. I don't know if they do it over here, where they put your name and the day, the year you were born and the year you died. Uh, so that was placed on one side of the casket. On the other side of the casket, this guy, like I said, he had been a herdsboy for a long time, and so he had a stick, the stick that you use to take care of cattle. If you've ever taken care of cattle, uh, you use a stick because cattle can become very stubborn. So sometimes when they're running around or being tomfoolerish, you have to hit them a little bit just to correct them. It's not necessarily beating them to injure them, but to kind of scare them a little bit and whatnot. So he had this stick, uh, hunting stick that he had been with for a long time. That was kind of like his signature, stick, and he'd walk around with it everywhere he went, whether he was taking care of cattle or not. And even if he was just walking around the village, he'd already carry the stick because it can also be a defensive tool. And so when he died, people, of course, they took that stick and they put it on his casket on one side. So, like I said, the other side was cross where it said when he died and his name and whatever. And on the other side, they put the stick, the hunting stick that he had been with for a long time. And so back to the story, back to this day, the last day before he's buried, the last evening. So let's say today is when is it? So right here today is Monday, right? Is it? Yeah, it's Monday. No, it's Sunday. So let's say it's today's Sunday evening, and he's supposed to be buried the next day morning or afternoon. So that day, so today is Sunday, the day before he's buried. You know, people gathered. I mean, it was a funeral, right? So the people had gathered. His close friends, some of the villagers who knew him, and of course his kids and our wife and family, and yeah, his married family, not the biological family that he came from. They were there, and the casket was there, and people were in the same. Some people were in the same house, just eating and talking and whatever. Then something very scary happened. Scary to some people, not to everybody, but something very peculiar happened. Now, remember I told you about the stick, right? The stick that was laid up at the side of the casket, on one side of the casket. Something happened. I don't know what happened, but it might have been the wind, or maybe just I don't know, maybe the tremor from people talking or walking in the house. But the stick falls and knocks the hell out of the table. There was a table next to the casket. So remember, the stick was on the side of the casket. Falls, hits the table. Now let me tell you something, fellows. If you're African and you're not, if you're watching this and you're not African, Africans are very superstitious. Okay, we view dead bodies and spirits as very we we view them in very high regard, and most Africans think the dead and spirits have huge influence of the living. And so when that stick fell and it hit the table, you know how wood can knock on other wood? It makes a lot of noise. And I'm going to describe to you right now, right? This is a very small pan. But when I knock it on the wood, it's extremely loud, right? And this is just a very small pan, maybe 5 grams. Now his stick was really huge. It was like about 4 or 5 foot tall and about 4 or 5 inches thick. It was a very huge walking stick. And so when it hit the table that was right next to it, it made a huge, huge noise. And people ran like bats out of hell. People ran out of that house because people thought he was coming alive. And so it was a very defining moment in that village. I mean, yeah, some people still think that it was his spirit, right? They kind of toppled off the stick. Uh, I don't know. If you ask me, I'd probably say probably there was some wind or something. I mean, there has to be some explanation. But for some people, they totally believe that that guy's spirit just came alive for one last time and just toppled over that stick as a sign, some in some way of symbolism. Maybe he wasn't happy. Or, I mean, there's all different explanations for why certain things happen during funerals and whatever. But yeah, some people still think that that guy might have, maybe he was signaling for the last time, or like saying goodbye, whatever. I don't believe it too much, but it's obviously open for discussion. Some people believe in spirits and whatever, and but yeah, it was a very peculiar funeral, and yeah, that's what happened. So John died. I mean, the next day, obviously after some time, people came and after everybody ran off of the room, some people were brave enough to come by and kind of like very cautiously entered the room again, and after careful reconnaissance. They were able to figure out, oh, there's nothing wrong here. And but that night was very uncertain, uncertain. Some people ran off. They didn't even spend the night there anymore. But they came the next day. That night passed and nothing happened. And the next day, at about 12, that was the actual last funeral, and he got buried, and yeah, that kind of he just ended like that. I mean, but yeah, that was kind of like the peculiar funeral of an old herdsboy. By the time he died, he was about 50 something or 60 something. I don't remember. I didn't know him that well. I mean, the village has very many people. I knew who he was, but I didn't know much about him. But yeah, those who, if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and like. I'll go ahead and end this video. Thank you very much to Valerie Chiri for commenting. She says that was fantastic. Thank you. You can find this episode on YouTube, on TikTok too. I'll be posting it there. Thank you very much to everybody who liked my previous video. I'm gonna go ahead and do a few shout outs. Obviously, I know Mr. Robbie. Robbie, thank you to Michael Ohana. Thank you to Edith, to Rob. Thank you to Rotich Tony, Hilda Violence, Kongogo Tanui. I don't know who that is. Sabit Maswai, Kiprotich Kip Brian, Ella Kelsey, Jacob Brian, Bernard Kemboy. I know that is MCA, and Basidi Jeromo. And from my other video, thank you to Rutaron Beer, Moses Bit, my village mate, all the way from Senetua. To JB Korir, Anjep Kurui, Maureen Misoy, Kathy Misik, and Gloria Chelimo. Yeah, so I'm going to end this video. Thank you to everyone, and till next time. Peace.